Cook Doolittle. On.
Well, good morning, Dr. Brad.
It's a good morning. Fresh coffee, hot.
Yes.
Sitting here, we're getting ready for episode number 2026. Isn't that wonderful? Hit like and subscribe below and leave a lot of comments. Now, there's a curiosity that I want to bring to everybody's attention. Episode 2022 received an inordinate amount of hits. People watched that one, and I don't know why. There's been some speculation as to the algorithm, so make sure you make the algorithm gods happy. I have to comment on this. There was a comment.
Title.
Pardon me?
It's probably it's like everything else. If we put more effort into production, which would include the title, the cover image, right? I don't know what else, some annotations. In other words, if we filled it out, it would probably get higher hits. But otherwise, I don't know. It's obviously because all the people that came were new. And what was interesting is the people who came that were new, which means they're already aware of us, right? Most likely, watched as much of the video as people who were established. And so it just means that, we got, hitting the algorithm makes a big difference. But the problem is I don't want that. I don't want it to be what, in other words, if somebody else was responsible for
I get you.
Production, that'd be fine. But I only want to work on the work.
I get you.
Popularity.
All right. No, I do. I want to comment on this. There was a fellow on Meadowbrook Memories who quoted Epicurus on the question of theodicy. And there seems to have been some misapprehension of my understanding and why I brought that forward, which is there is no religious undertone here, fellows. Just because the use of God the term God was employed for the purpose of asking the question, which caused the question of theodicy to become revealed, which reveals the metaphysical orientation of the individual, which betrays their orientation with regard to responsibility. Is the responsibility mine or the other? That's the question. And that's what theodicy answers.
Yeah, I think I can explain the reaction, Brad, is that not because I have it, but because I understand others in this case. And that's that for some of us, for you in particular, good example, the historical context of moving through theological history and philosophical history is informative, right? So you go back to the Hebrew language often as an example of showing how old this concept is.
Yeah.
Right. And people bring in philosophy all the time. So there's a tendency for people on the right to fall into the three groups, the four groups, which is they and it's normal because we all follow what has the greatest number of associations for us, and because that's the least neural cost. Right. So we tend to build upon whatever foundations we find. Now, we know that theological basis is based on indoctrination. We know that the philosophical basis is largely based on self-learning. And we know the scientific basis is based largely on formal education. And so this is sort of like saying, what kind of fiction books do you like to read? Mystery or science? It's the same kind of thing where you tend to learn a paradigm and you like to work within a paradigm, right? Whatever emotes you the most because of its associations. So because of that, you have the sciencey guys like us, right? The philosophy guys, right? And the religious guys. And there's also the ideology guys,
Okay.
And ideology is a informal sense, means under democracy it became possible to shortcut the rigor of theology and philosophy and merely appeal to motivate people toward an end under democracy. That's what an ideology means, right? Now we I'm always bitching about logic and rationalism and reason and right how these words get conflated. The same thing happens to theology, philosophy, ideology, and science. Even with science, I always complain there's a difference between philosophizing and theorizing, right? I view that difference as very obvious and very hard. If you're philosophizing, you're probably trying to find a good, right, or something to agree to. Whereas if you're theorizing, you're just trying to figure out whether it's true or not. In other words, where there's consistency.
Yeah, you're trying to create a falsifiable, testable function.
Right. And so so when you look at this theology, philosophy, it really should be flipped around. So it should be ideology, theology, philosophy, science, or maybe it's a triangle. I can't quite, I suppose if I thought about
I would
that.
think it is a triangle.
Yeah, it probably is, isn't it? What it is?
Ideology is somewhere in the middle. It's like some kind of sloppy philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. So, so yeah, that's exactly what it is. Thank you. It's like, it's not bound by the same consistency or systematizing that philosophy, theology, and science are. So you're right, it's in the middle. Okay, great, thank you. It's a pragmatism. Okay, thank you, Brad, for solving that problem.
Bird, that was an easy one, man. Working with you makes me smarter, man. Just saying. How hard to believe that is. Like, really? I thought I was smart. I quit believing that for a long time now. I after I got my handed to me trying to be in private practice in a place where social medicine is the de rigueur. It's okay.
Well, I think I told you the story before, but I was trying to choose between law and once I said I'm not going to be a physicist because it means you're sucking dick. I said I would choose between law, medicine, and engineering. Right, these are the three respectable professions for right. And I'm like, so I studied law for a year. I'm like, well, that's the most unethical thing I can do in my life.
Right. It's like, how do we bend that and not
how do we lie for a living? Not a Catholic schoolboys obsessed with logic.
Right. That won't work.
There's medicine, and the whole thing of I have a hard time because I come across as a hard guy, but I'm actually really soft, right? So the suffering bothers me too much. I can't do it. The same reason I can't go into my family's business, which is the funeral business.
I understand.
I can't tolerate it.
It's like finger painting.
Same. Although if they don't watch us, they won't understand. So, so the third was engineering, but in engineering, you have engineering proper, which means government, bureaucracy, finance, construction.
No, but that's what you sort of went into.
Right. And but then there's software.
Yes.
And software is really philosophy.
Yeah.
In code.
It's code, right? And it's fascinating business.
It's a wonderful thing. And so while I went to school for art, right? I went to school for a year for engineering. I said, I can't work with these fucking people the rest of my life. I went to school for a year for law, and I said, oh my God, I can't do this for a living. I'll end up, in jail. Because I'm just like, this whole thing is immoral bullshit. I couldn't believe it. And then I went into art, and it was the only positive thing
That's fascinating.
Right. And so I studied art, and it was beautiful, and it was informative, and it's where I began my first philosophical work. Right. I mean, technically I did work on religion in high school, but it's where I really got to be a philosophize was in art, the philosophy of art. And I should have studied philosophy when they asked me, or I should have studied literature when they asked me, because those two things would have been
Oops.
fine. And I
I
was just too
understand.
fucking stupid to do it. But anyway,
I understand.
but
This-
the great thing about engineering in my age, or software engineering, is that in the 70s and 80s, it was just coming into being. And
Yeah.
it was like running around with a basket catching money.
I feel like I made a great deal of mistakes in this regard because I failed to catch the bus. I did not understand, and
And
I
so
missed the bus.
I moved to the city of Bellevue, which is Bellevue, Redmond, Seattle. I moved to
Yeah.
Bellevue, which is where you live if you want to carry a big laundry basket and run around Microsoft campus catching the money that they throw out.
Wow.
So,
It's like a cartoon.
wasn't a hard. Well, we used to joke about it, but I'm not. That's actually a topic of conversation, because the problem when you're building a business you want to double every year is if you have a client like that you can't ever get them down to being less than 20% of your business, because if you hire a fleet of salespeople, that's why I went national and global, international and international. Right. Is because I was just trying to get the business out of being 50% of Microsoft, because no matter what you do, right, the salespeople are always like, why should I work hard when I can just go over there and catch money in a basket?
Right? You can't be dependent upon them, right?
Well, you can't sell a business that's
all
right.
All Microsoft service.
And I ended up selling it to Accenture, Avanade Accenture, that conglomerate, whatever it is, which is the same thing really as selling it to Microsoft. Because they actually couldn't build, they were really shitty, honestly, at building their services business for reasons. And I was like, I would just love to go, if I could have done something good with the company rather than making fun of them all the time, I would have loved to do that. But the arrogance was unbelievable. And I'm like, you can't solve customers when you're arrogant. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm off track here.
No, you're good.
About engineering.
I'm ready to I will tell you that I think you convinced me yesterday that you got to put in the civilizational group evolutionary strategies, but it has to be sufficiently distanced from
yeah, I think
blame.
I think yes. I think your intuition to get the blame out was right, because I know it because I feel it in my gut when you say it is true, and I just want to deny it.
All right.
How's that for honesty?
That was perfect. It's just we're good. So, but I reanalyzed it, and I'm like, oh no, it can be done, and it can be sufficiently distanced from blame or associations of guilt that are not necessary to be sanitized sufficiently for public consumption as science.
Right. I mean, you see this in authors all the time. The one I'm thinking of at the moment that comes to mind is David Reich, who's a Jewish geneticist, runs the best genetic analysis lab. And he does not want to say, sorry guys, there's meaningful genetic differences between the races, and all it's going to do is get clearer. Right. And so this is a guy with every institutional, revenue, intellectual, cultural, personal bias against saying that. And what he does is says he just is honest. Is like, we have to start to come to terms with the fact that there are differences. Just like the people around 2012, it's like we can't deny it anymore. The sex differences are really substantial, the more abstract it is from direct action. So we have to start coming to terms with the sex, class, race, right? I mean, or even the trait sex, class, race differences as something that we have to abandon the blank slate,
Yes.
right? And more, what I'm saying is worse than that, which is I'm saying not only do we have to abandon the blank slate, but we have to abandon the belief of oneness or universalism in the via positiva. We can only result with the via negativa, which is there are
Wow.
things we dislike equally, but there are not things we want equally. If
No, that's not possible, right? There's no positiva
and
value
so
system.
and so I try to humorously address this as agrarianism was caused a massive global hybridization event between what was definitely speciation events, right? What we think of as the four races were heading towards speciation. Now, speciate, right? And I'm like, and so what's happening now is
Right, so
the end of
geographical isolation.
correct. You were adapting to local
towards
environment.
that direction, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't. The differences between the races aren't big. They're just meaningful. In other words, they're no, excuse me. They're not big. They're just not meaningless. Is the correct
There
answer.
you go. That's a nice way to
Right.
say it.
Yeah, they're not meaningless. And the hybridization events produce what we think of as hybridizations between species. In other words, group traits do transfer and cause interesting effects in hybridization. So not all of which are good. So when I said this, I'm like, well, so the end of agrarianism ended the need for the hybridization of it. What the woke movement is trying to do is, again, create another at least anti-European hybridization of it.
Because the Europeans are the monkey wrench in the gears, man.
Well, it's because we're the, how do you say? See, they use this word supremacy. I don't like. I would just call superiority is simply a measure. I don't think. I mean, our culture.
It's the adaptability is the problem. The
right
adaptability of the Europeans is regarded as the problem.
Right. So my view is sorry.
They can't keep up.
So my view is it's costly to keep up with
yes
faster adapting species. So my point is just you just tell the fucking truth, and then you say here's how we solve it with the via negativa. Right? I mean,
right. The issue would be this is, and I can't imagine anybody arguing the premise that cooperation in the protection of demonstrated interests is somehow egregious or problematic. And other than that, you're free to do whatever you like.
It isn't, as long as we give up colonialism.
What does that mean? Give up colonialism?
We give up Aryanism.
What does that mean? Give up colonialism?
In other words, we did the Indo-European expansion,
yeah,
the Mediterranean expansion, the continental expansion, and the Age of Sail expansion. And during each of those expansions, we didn't do what the Chinese did, which is contain it.
So self-isolation, self-containment.
Containment, right? And so we tried to do is keep getting and there's a natural incentive for this, which is why I was talking about where does the origin of the idea of Europe come from the past couple of days. Is that we were trying to expand, and that's because the trade routes were always better in the axis of the continents. And so the money was always in beginning in the Bronze Age between Afghan tin and Cypriot copper, right? I mean,
that's like so old, man. It's like ancient trade routes,
right? I mean, but these things. I mean, you look at the amount of trade that happened in the freaking Neolithic,
right?
Neolithic, even the early Neolithic, and you're like, how did the hell did that bead, get from there to there? I mean, that's like thousands of miles. How did that happen?
That's
Well,
right.
it happened because I wanted your thing, and here's my bead, right? And you wanted, right?
Yeah, yeah.
God knows if it took one hand or five hands to make that happen, or maybe it
That's
went
right.
through centuries to make it happen. Who the hell
Who
knows?
knows? Right?
Right. And so we have to, I don't want to lose my train of thought, I almost did, is that we have to give up on this, our version of universalism
What is that?
is domestication, lifting others up.
We have to let them be.
You have to let them be.
It's okay.
No, and then they can adapt at their own rate by trade. But
Right.
now and then the intervening problem is there's a point at which there's no possibility of trade.
That's because you have nothing that's worth trading for.
Right. And so you have to remain Christian charitable in trying to get people to where they can trade with you, which is Christianity. Right.
Okay.
But you can't go out and think that we can go out and spread what we want to the world, because every time we try, it turns out it's not just that they don't want to, it's they can't. Now, we've been almost as successful with spreading modernity, which is realism, naturalism, science, technology, medicine, and the agrarian, because we do have an agrarian revolution here, the agrarian revolution, the commercial revolution, the financial revolution, the industrial revolution, the technological revolution, the medical revolution, and the new, we called informational revolution, communications revolution. We've brought all these revolutions to the world in just a few hundred years. Just like in the ancient world, we brought what we think of as reason to the world in a few hundred years. And just as in the Bronze Age, we brought Arianism to the world through not so nice means. So the problem is we spread Arianism very, very aggressively. We did the Age of Sail a little too aggressively, and this forces us in the problem of having to do the Age of Modernity as defensively. In other words, the post-war method had to be defensively, because we were trying to make ourselves wealthier by making everybody else wealthier. Right? It's the Smithian hypothesis. So we just have to realize you can't. You got to make do. You can't. You got to be. China was right when they went out and they were in India and then the coast of Africa. Like, what the fuck? I don't want any of this shit. This is horrible. And they went home. Now they went home because the Mongols were coming. Not the Mongols. The whatever the hell they were coming again. Those guys were coming again.
Those guys from the North Country, man, they're bad.
They're just always a fucking nightmare. Well, I mean, the same thing was true for the Persians, the Mesopotamians, any advanced civilization is always dealing with those fuckers from the desert, the steppe, or the tundra. I mean, it's the same fucking problem no matter what you get, right? So, in any event, I was trying to make a point there, which is we have to give up on that.
Yeah, so that's it. So it's like
we can maintain Christianity. We can maintain Christian ethics externally and give up on Arianism externally. And we have to maintain Arianism internally and constrain that desire to create a universal diaspora. I mean, the Muslims have to do that too. Chinese have to do it. Russians have to do it. We all have to do it. Anyway, I started a chain there, and I wanted to get to another, and I've lost my recursion.
You're giving up colonialism.
Yeah, we'd have to give up colonialism,
And
but
I call it repentance from European universalism and Arianism.
So so that we have to we get into trouble every time we try to expand, and so we can tell people that here's the law, here's the science of cooperation. We all can get along as long as basically we respect our borders. And if you don't respect your borders, then if you don't respect borders, then everybody has the right to come kick your ass, because that's all everybody has to do is respect each other's borders. You don't got to do anything else. Now, there's some problems left in the world, which is that the Europeans didn't finish the process of colonialization and left artificial borders that were completely arbitrary.
Well,
And we
there was
created a
reason for
fucking
that.
nightmare.
They
What?
did it on purpose.
Yeah, well, we should help. We should be worried about helping people fix the problem. And what we're doing, we're giving the law to fix the problem, right?
I appreciate that.
So, we're working hard on this particular thing. And I forgot how we got on the topic in the first place. It was to try to figure out how we avoid, the point I was trying to make was following David Reich, which is, you just have to say, we're trying to do this very good because we can't get around this truth, right? And so here's the method by which we compensate for discovering a truth, right? And our ambitions are to provide people with the tools to accommodate reality under mutual prosperity. And it requires that we don't think we're all the fucking same.
That's right.
Right? That's all. And you don't try to make other people like you.
No.
I mean, the only thing we require is markets. So that's the whole point.
That's how we settle the differences between us.
Yeah, markets. We all complain about polity and society and family and economy, right? But those are local phenomenon. If we trade, then we can produce our own local phenomenon suitable to our wants and needs, right? But if we trade, right? Because trade is like prices. It's just doesn't matter. Does that mean that some geographies are worse and some are better? Well, sure. It doesn't mean you can go take over somebody else's geography, because
that would be rude.
That would be rude, yeah, and that will get you wars and things.
That's not cooperative. That's right. I reflect back upon my original statement, which was the premise that reciprocity and cooperation and markets for settlement of differences is somehow objectionable, does not enter my imagination as any kind of reasonable.
Well, it doesn't for the adult mind.
We understand one another.
So this is the fundamental problem: is the left, the feminine left's use of this narrative of oppression, which is adulting. And adulting is responsibility, including the responsibility for making decisions at scale. And so when you have we can't allow people to have decisions on their competency without having to create the opportunity for internal conflict. So whenever the left tells you can have these false promises of communism and socialism and all this other stuff that they think they can have, or equality, or that the sexes are, or that it's all, every one of their false promises, every one of their lies.
Right.
This magical thinking disqualifies you from participating in adult conversation.
Go to your room.
And so, it's not a matter of you're trying to oppress them. It's a matter of self-defense from them.
It's an interesting function. So I regard the narrative generated, which is regarding the oppression, simply is to mask the harsh reality of the necessity of responsibility for your actions in the world.
Correct.
That's all.
They don't want responsibility. That's really what it is, right? You and I sit here, and all our other guys, we're sitting around, most guys, honestly, any conservative guys, basically saying, I'm willing to be responsible, but
not for all of y'all.
Not for all of you.
Come on.
When these conservative guys are talking about being left behind and not being able to get marriages and whatever because the economy is not being taken care of, all they're saying is, I want to be responsible because that's how I create value. And I can't be responsible if what you do is you engineer irresponsibility And and instead of working to produce means by which I can be responsible.
Right, rewarding irresponsibility. Wow.
Yeah.
And
That's all they're doing.
and then oppressing the responsible ones.
Correct. That's all they're doing.
So rude.
Yeah. It's that, it's like, I used to get, when I first heard Peterson talk, I was like, I'm not really big on this. What is it? But it's absolutely, it's the right word. Because we always use the via positivus, liberty, freedom, sovereignty. That just means responsibility. That's all that means.
Yeah.
See, we want responsibility. Well, what does the other side want when they mean irresponsible? I want irresponsibility.
Flip side of that coin, not responsibility.
Right. So what we're saying in our civilization, contrary to all the others, is we're trying to maximize the distribution of responsibility in order to maintain the velocity of adaptation, the evolution we kick, which is the reason for we're prosperous and why we're not supreme, but supremacist, but we're superior, right? Is simply because you maximize the scope of responsibility, all right? And so we're trying to get as many people into condition of responsibility. In other words, what do you think the military does? It tries to make you responsible for everything.
You are responsible.
Right. And so you're responsible for the guy next to you, you're responsible for you, you're responsible for getting him home and you home, and you're responsible keeping your shield over the shield next, the shield next. I mean, that's what responsibility means. It's that, right? And so we're trying to institutionalize basically the industrialization of the production of responsibility against which so many revolt.
Right. It's for the systematic production of increasing fields of scope of responsibility for all individuals.
Right.
So
how did your operational speech get so much better, so much faster?
Told you, hanging out with you, Kurt. So just keep on getting smart.
No, you like crossed the line. I'm like, and I'm just noticing it the past couple of days, but today I really notice it.
It's the coffee, man. It's fresh.
Is that what it is? No, it's fucking hard.
I don't.
The reason I brought it up is to tell the audience how hard it is to get, so you can do that chain of reasoning.
I didn't try. I just said what was right. I'm like, I don't think I could do it if I tried. It's definitely hard.
It's just hard, right? And we got this guy Contra Fabian out there now who's got it down, which is
good.
This other guy, Deck.
Yeah.
Walter's getting there. You gotta.
Excellent.
It's freaking hard, right? To make chains, right? Because we want to say "buh," which is a category. We want to say a single word or a concept, or which is an ideal type, right? We want to use an analogy, but actually going from an analogy to a measurement, right, and then to a balanced equation, right, is actually fucking hard.
Right. So it's like this goes to this supremacy talk, okay, which is quite interesting because it is false as a category and,
yes,
and true as a measure.
True as a measure, yes. Okay, that's good. Okay.
Which is kind of very unusual and not arguable.
Yes. So anyway, so we're trying to solve a pretty hard problem. Anyway, shit, I took you off track. I didn't mean to.
Not too much. Not too much. So we're talking about the science of cooperation and how can anybody really argue against it as a bad thing? Because it's like reciprocity and behaving in a manner that is not irreciprocal, and you're free to do whatever you want. There's nothing to argue against.
Well, what they're saying is, but I need help. Okay, fine. Nobody's complaining if you need help getting responsible. We're complaining if you want help being irresponsible, which is basically everything left wants.
All right. All right. Secure the border for me while I do whatever I want and don't help you.
So the of course the way the systems thinkers work is, okay, I have to alter the economy to increase jobs.
Okay.
All right. How can I do that? Well, I can create fake jobs, or I can make capital investments that create demand for the kind of jobs these people can do. And I can discipline these people with educate them to the point where they can do the jobs. So what the government does is they don't create the economy. They don't create the education. They tell you a bunch of bullshit that you're a snowflake and have natural intrinsic value, and they throw you in the meat grinder called an economy, which is hyper adaptive, and you're unprepared for it. And then we're blaming those people for being unprepared by a government whose entire purpose is generating responsibility. You know why, though? You know why? Is that we didn't engineer the government to produce responsibility. Right? That's what happened.
They generated the demand for authority.
Well, where did the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, or where did that responsibility came from?
Came from
the culture and the church.
Yeah.
Right? The law was just the enforcement mechanism for the men who gained enough power, who had responsibility. Right? Because I mean, if you don't have responsibility, you're a ward of the church.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's what most people were, wards of the church. Right. The wards of the manor, if you're right, and the manor is responsible for this part of you, and the church is a ward of you for the family matters and social and moral matters. And the manor is responsible for military and economic matters. And you're too low on the totem pole to participate in political and strategic matters. So, I mean, we had these institutions. So when the government said we don't want to have a state religion like England, right? They were actually trying to keep that responsibility. In other words, they said you need Christianity, you need the religion, but what we really need is you need the church, and we don't have one. You need the church to create this responsibility, because that's what it did. They created.
So there's a stack of relations that is like, it goes from physical, you build upon the physical with the emotional, and then upon that you put the rational. And the church was responsible for the physical and emotional care and management of those who were unable to manage in the rational realm, it seems. And the rational realm was reserved for those who were able to handle the responsibility.
Correct. And what does responsibility mean? Property. How do you get property? Demonstrated interest. How do you keep it? Responsibility. How do you keep it without imposing costs upon others? Responsibility. So what happened is again, I keep blaming on the Industrial Revolution because it's true.
Sorry, you decomposed me.
Well, you get this windfall, right?
Horribly, it's such a magnitude that the modern mind has difficulty to understand it.
Right.
Because it's like the poorest among us is richer than the richest were 200 years ago. It's unbelievable.
And it's only been, you really start to feel it around 1920, right? 1820, people say 1900, maybe that's probably right. I don't know. Somewhere between 1890 and 1890, 19, you really can start to see it. I mean, if you live from 1850 to 1930,
yes,
I mean, you basically got teleported to another planet.
Airplanes and
wow. Right. I mean, holy shit, right? Well, it creates the same effect that the Spanish gold did.
Yes.
In Spain and the Netherlands.
Absolutely.
Right. It creates, or the gold mine, the silver mine did for Athens, right? I mean, every time, or who's the African guy that had the gold mines? His name I always forget. was just throwing gold around like anything. Or it creates it creates what we traditionally call decadence, but not in the right.
Yes, it is decadence.
It is decadence, but we tend to associate decadence with hedonistic pleasures. The kind of decadence it created was irresponsibility.
Well, that's it.
Does that make sense?
The Spanish lost their capacity to build boats because they outsourced it to the Dutch. Why would I make a boat? I have so much gold. I can hire these Dutch. They're so cheap. That's a form of decadence, yeah?
Yes, it is. So we're so when we say we're in an age of decadence, we're actually at the end stage of the age of decadence where it's actually hitting our women, and and they're becoming whores and mass numbers and stuff, right? So, and our men are becoming, I'm virtuous despite the fact that I have no responsibilities, right? What a matter?
It's just the pain of being
the pain of it. But the decadence begins. When did he write that? When did he write that? I gotta find that. I know the first time I notice it is when did he publish it? When did Bentham publish? Jeremy Bentham. Life and Writings. Blah 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 blah. So in the he described Westminster as a wretched place for instruction. 70s. Okay, so same. All right. So so the problem is that you start to get this, the agrarian revolution create this air of freedom from the laws of nature, which rolls right into the Industrial Revolution, which rolls right into the First World War. And the problem you're getting is that the reason I saw it in Bentham is the reason I laugh at Bentham is he tried to do what I just did, which is systematize the law, and he couldn't do it, right? But of course he couldn't, because the knowledge didn't exist then, right? I mean, couldn't do it. But I see that as the turning point, because you have all these guys who seem to be right, like Smith and Hume and Locke and whatever. And then Bentham comes along, and I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? You got Blackstone right there. How do you get from Blackstone to Bentham without thinking you've now free of the bonds that Blackstone said existed? Right? And Blackstone just isn't scientific enough to state, to remove the God, from the situation. Does that make sense?
Right. When did he write it?
Just it's the same time, Revolutionary War.
But it's like this is interesting. What's it? Jeremy? What's Blackstone?
Bentham. Jeremy.
No, but yeah, Bentham is 1848. He was born. When was?
Okay. Yeah, it's 1848. Right.
I mean, Blackstone. He was writing about the law as well, right?
Yeah, but he was around at the time of the founders.
Yeah, but it's just like 1776 is such a monumental year, because it was the first commercial steam engine was produced that year, in addition to the American Revolution. And
it's really the question is, the American Revolution happens, and then the French get it wrong. With the French Revolution, they do everything wrong. So we actually, the British Revolution, you get the Glorious Revolution, you get the British working out the modern state, which actually manifests in the American state, right? The problem is the French are like, the French aren't like a together people like the English. They're like all fucked up, and so they have the French Revolution. They kill all their nobility. First of all, they get rid of all the Protestants, which is the middle class. Then they kill all the nobility, which is the upper class. Now the peasants are running around. It's like, I always think of, when I talk to French people, I said, here's my vision of you guys. Is you had the French Revolution, you killed all the adults, the kids went in the closet, put on their parents' costumes, and ran around like nobility. But I mean, it's like fucking children are still running the place. right? Women and children still running the place. So gets them really pissed off. It's really kind of fun. But the problem is we were there. The French Revolution starts it going bad.
Wait,
And you see it in Jefferson.
the reason I bring this up is so Blackstone is 1723 to 1780.
Yes.
So he's absolutely before the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, but he's also he's the legal, he's the frame of law that the founders used. That's why I said you got to read Blackstone, you don't understand the Constitution.
Right.
Because that's like the stuff I've put in the Constitution.
Yeah.
Is the stuff that didn't make it from Blackstone into the Constitution. It was just assumed because that was the frame of reference for the law.
Right.
And if you want to get from Thomism, you want to get from Aquinas to Blackstone is not very difficult.
Right. I'm liking that. And it's like, but yeah, so it's like there's the sea change though is the industrialization began.
I think it's the mixture of I think it's the mixture of the French Revolution as a counter-revolution against the English invention of the modern state, which is right.
Yeah.
And because France had always been trying to move the papacy to France and become the Roman Empire. I mean, they're still Macron. What's Macron doing? He's still trying to recreate Paris as Rome, right? I mean, what did Napoleon try to do? Create Paris as Rome. What the French monarchy's trying to do? They're trying to bring Rome to France, right? I mean, they even tried a couple times, right? So, so that's why France is all fucked up. So, that's my scholarly opinion. That's why France is all fucked up.
That's the metric we're using. It's a meter.
It just gets a laugh if I say it that way rather than so anyway. So then the problem is this French idea is floating out there, and then the Industrial Revolution kicks in 1830, which is really not right. I mean, it's really the Great Revolutions happened in the 1700s, but the Industrial Revolution happened starts in 1830. It really starts in England in 1790, 1780, but you start seeing it as a thing, especially the United States in 1830. And so what's happened is we've now got this that we've got the modern state, which tells us how to organize economies at scale, which is rule of law. We've got the French saying, well, we're not limited only by nature. We can do whatever the fuck we want. And then you have the Industrial Revolution that comes in and says, well, it turns out, not because of what the French said, but because of what the English said, you can, in fact, liberate us from some of the most debilitating parts of the laws of nature, which is scarcity, right, and its strength, being dependent on animal labor to change state. And then you get into Marx comes along and says, not only are we
if we got to industrialize the French counter-revolution.
It's just and so it was like the English aristocracy. We can be an aristocracy of everyone. The French, we can make a sort of lower middle class of everyone, and the Marxists come along. We can make the peasants in control. And it's like this is just this isn't advancement. This is collapse.
It's a form of decadence, right?
Right. It's just decadence because this belief that you're free, right? And so what's happened is that played out through 1970. And the only reason it took that long is because the rest of the world had foolishly chosen Marxism, decided to kill 100 million of each other and try to put themselves back into agrarian poverty, agrarian certainty in poverty and non-adaptivity. And then by the 70s, we had lost our advantage. And by the 90s, everybody had given up on Marxism. And so what we're back to is everybody's adopted basically some version of capitalism, mixed economy capitalism. Everybody's adopted some version of rule of law in our financial institutions and all our technologies and sciences, et cetera. But they haven't changed their fundamental group operational strategy because why? Right. They don't trust each other like we do because they're not worthy of the trust like we are.
No, I think that's not.
Did that hurt? Did that hurt?
I know. I find that statement to be incorrect. They they know exactly how to trust each other.
Yes.
It's like,
And so you have to understand what produced the institutions of responsibility, that produced the institutions of truth, that produced the consequence of trust. Well, we did that. We did it better than anybody by far. Now, some people have been able to do it at family scale, some at tribal scale, but nobody's been able to do it at, you could argue that the Indians succeeded at class scale. The Chinese and the Japanese, of course, succeeded just like we did, for the same exact reasons. And the Chinese weren't able to create trust with each other, but they were able to create hierarchical trust of the state, right? Which turned out to be a bad idea. And so, you just get this, we just have this thing of trust the law, which is really weird. Because
it's abstract.
It's abstract.
But it goes to in God we trust. And it goes to the via negativa and not the via positiva. We don't trust the man-made artifact, which we call the social construction.
Yeah. We trust the evidence. It's actually the evidence. When we say custom or customary law, it means evidence. We trust the evidence. In other words, show me.
I want you to know this. I went to medical school in Missouri, and it's one of the proudest things I have to say. It's just, don't tell me, show me.
Show me, which is wonderful.
There you go.
So,
right, man.
That's an interesting line of, we just made a really nice
Arc. Yes.
set of arcs, of narrative arcs, which is actually the fun part of doing this work, is you weave together this incredible yarn, of interrelated topics. And instead of creating these narrow verticals, silos, we weave together all these things constantly from all these different directions until you see how everything's
connected,
related.
What's interesting is it's paradoxical. It's like it's paradoxical. So the solution is like silos. It's vertical integration on geographic lines of small polities.
Yes.
As opposed to stratigraphic, like the lefties want to do, which is like the way India is generated. And with little ability to change classes. And so, yeah, it's just, but it's the logic that we have is universal logic, because it's based on evidence and science, as opposed to fabricated as a matter of convenience.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, the way I think it's like a humorously position is, by trusting in the evidence, we don't have to trust each other, and in doing so, we produce trust of each other. Does that make sense? You see how
it beautiful, it's paradoxical, man.
The paradoxical nature of it. So it's why you produce an anthropomorphic God, right? Or you produce an emperor with godlike properties. Is I may not trust you and you may not trust me, but we throw that trust into the deciding party. And that way, that's the rule that gets established, right? So whether that's a god or an emperor or whatever. But we just do what's called custom, which is what most people originally did, right? I mean, in your local range. But we trust custom. We call that custom the common law. What's the common law? It's the fucking evidence, right? And that's all it is. But how do you know the difference between authoritarian evidence and evidence proper? Authoritarian records of authoritarian statements or evidence. Well, the resolution of empirical disputes by adversarial competition demonstrating who won by the truth, right? And so we create markers for the production of truth, right? So we only have to trust that, which means we end up trusting each other, which is hysterical to me.
It's very odd.
Right? So if you combine that social with the military personal, is political, you get this really interesting phenomenon, because like in the caste system, you have a certain there's a certain respect and disrespect among castes, but in the military, you can't disrespect the private.
No,
He's if he does his duty,
he's
he
entitled
gets
to dignity.
respect.
Yep, yep.
Right. So this is the interesting thing about our model, is this respect is demonstrated, not like in Islam, you have to give it, right? But in our model, you only have to get respect if you do your duty. Right. And then if you had, once you have that in the political sphere, then you have a way of being worthy. You have truth in the social and economic sphere, which is trust, which is a way you get respect. And you have Christian forgiveness, which gets you out of retaliation cycles. So, I mean, you have all these wonderful 3 dimensions of tools: the military, the legal, and which is really the authoritarian, the legal or reciprocal commercial, and the social familial. You have this triangle of creating an equilibrium that creates this virtuous cycle of just fucking tell the truth.
How hard was that?
Well, it's actually fucking hard,
Apparently,
because it requires everybody do it. That's the problem. It's how do you get to the point? Well, this is my argument of why civilizations have to evolve in a certain order. Is how do you get to the point where you can trust the people enough so that it's worth to trust? In other words, it's a critical mass problem. And so, how do you build that critical mass?
Right.
Well, I mean, the way I've said it is, the only evidence I have is you start with the military. The military creates a state, which is the military. The state creates rule of law. The rule of law creates an economy. The economy creates everyone as a customer, and everyone as a customer creates ethics, right?
Right.
But what if you can't go through that series? What if you have some other path? Well, you'll never get that wonderful thing called rule of law, or that
now I want to
everyone
make
is a
a distinction
customer.
here. It's what you're calling rule of law is not the same as authoritarian law.
Right, I mean natural law.
Well, that's a distinction that needs to be brought out to bear, because it's
we say this all the time.
I know, but I'm helping the audience, not you.
Okay, so what we mean is sovereignty and demonstrated interests, and reciprocity and display, which means property and tort.
Right. And it's like I was just reading an article today, and it was talking about the progressives and their cult of the not authoritarian, but the expert cult, which is authoritarian edicts that are not subject to falsification.
She must be believed. The authority must be believed. Right? It's just herd behavior. Why is herd behavior good? It achieves an end without responsibility. Everything they do is an evasion of responsibility. Once you realize that's all female behavior is driven by evasion of responsibility, so her responsibility is limited to herself and her offspring. You realize that's all female behavior, just that. That's it.
There's a psychological term, and it evades my mind momentarily, but behavior of a crowd and their irresponsibility. They tend to behave in manners that they would not behave in individually, because they are alleviated of responsibility by virtue of being in mobs.
Correct.
There's a name for that, and I wish I had it at the
mob.
Will you nice people please put it in the comments below so that we can have a fine discussion. This is really a good discussion, Kurt.
Boy, we really hit some great topics today. I have a topic I want to talk about when we get there, but we don't have to.
It's all up to you, Kurt.
So how were you starting this out again? What were you starting out with?
We're abandoning the blank slate. We're moving through decadence and into group behaviors.
Yeah, so I was trying to walk through the stages of decadence, beginning with the belief that you can violate those constraints that previously bound you. And I think we made that point though, right? We've sort of, and so now we're in a point where the agrarian age is over.
That's right.
We're even worried about the agrarian concept of mating and marriage being over. But what's really happened is that it's just we failed to engineer the government to continue the production of responsibility, and instead took the temporary windfall of the various industrial and technological revolutions as a false promise of freedom from the laws of nature, and so that we were no longer that our government could let us all run wild instead of teach us to be responsible.
Well, the 20th century was running wild. We were led to satisfaction of animal impulses and not to responsibility.
So what we're left with is, so what do we do now? My argument has been, well, just give people a choice. The responsible people will separate because they desire for responsibility. What will happen is that we'll produce a high quality, high trust commons, and the opposition won't. They'll continue to destroy cities one at a time. That will mean that the people who are now get to choose between responsible and irresponsible. Enough of those people will flee to the responsible order and the higher constraints on their behavior that do produce responsibility. And those that can't or won't will stay in those places. Those places will either continue to decline or they will adapt by continuing responsibility. If we don't do that, we get the one bad dog ruins the whole pack phenomenon, or one bad apple.
Right.
Which is that it becomes difficult to produce the system of trust upon which you and I are sort of doing, which allows us to willingly accept the responsibility cost of others because we can trust others are equally doing so. And they'll undermine our ability to maintain critical mass. And in effect, that's what they did through immigration. That's what they're doing through de-education, is they're preventing our ability to produce critical mass of responsibility and trust by marching through our institutions and destroying the institutions of responsibility production.
Yeah.
Because that's what they love. They use this march of the institutions as if they're arbitrary. But the Western institutions are not arbitrary. They're institutions of culture production. But what culture are they producing?
That's right.
Truth and responsibility.
Gotcha. I like that.
And so what are they doing? They're destroying truth and responsibility, the false promise of freedom from those laws of nature, under the pretense that the same kind of liberation from toil that was made by the Industrial Revolution is a continuation of the in other words, our freedom from toil is not the same as freedom from responsibility. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So they are saying they're taking, and this is what they always do, right? It's like the argument that women never get enough.
Conflation, right?
Right, is that they're playing the game of your freedom from toil is not freedom from work and is not freedom from responsibility. We may actually be able to get people largely free of what we call work today, but they can never be free of responsibility. If they don't demonstrate responsibility, they can have no say. They cannot demonstrate competency, in which demonstrates they can have opinion or influence on those institutions that produce responsibility. So, I mean, I don't think
that seems
really
reasonable.
It's not a hard problem if you actually use meaningful terms. So the problem is we've built this history of religious, philosophical, and moral terminology.
Yes.
And these terms are feelings. They're not actions. Responsibility, as we describe it, for preservation of sovereignty, reciprocity, and demonstrated interest using truth and duty, right? Of your own and for others, that responsibility Well, that's an operational term. We can test, we can disambiguate it and turn it into actions. If we say institutions of cultural production, that doesn't tell us that that culture is producing responsibility by the means of truth and duty and reciprocity and sovereignty. It doesn't teach us that. And so it doesn't teach us that the institutions of cultural production are doing fitness, emotion, mindfulness, uh, uh, understanding, and finally competency. We have to climb that hierarchy. So if you don't disambiguate these terms, you
Yes.
leave them open to the left's magical thinking, false promises, by the mere act of verbal manipulation, by what you and I call conflation, inflation, and conflation, inflation, and obfuscation or obstruction.
That's correct. I like that.
Well, I mean, if we could just share this one goddamn.
That little clip right there. Right there.
So this is the reason we talk in these terms that people tease us about, and it's so hard to learn, in this grammar that's so burdensome to explain, in these chains of reasoning they're so hard to follow, is because we're preventing the use of the use of vocabulary to engage in inflation, conflation, and obstruction, right? Or
It's
obfuscation.
interesting. It's interesting because the user of such terminology does not have to be aware of their use of it for such purposes.
Correct.
Like they seem to be intent upon satisfying their own biases given the circumstance to
Right,
protect
so-
their demonstrated interests.
Correct. And so it's really convenient to avoid due diligence, which is what we're teaching people how to do, right? With vocabulary and phrasing, operational language, right? We're saying break a thing into its parts to ensure that what you're saying is actually what you claim it is, right? Whether is it true and reciprocal? Well, if you can't do what we do, you can't demonstrate you know what the fuck you're talking about. So you can't claim it's true and reciprocal if you can't turn it into operational language. So what you are is a parrot of lies. So this is my argument. You're a liar if you distribute a lie, regardless of whether you're engaging in lying, whether you are distributing the lie or inventing the lie. Most people identify opportunities to lie because they're good, and they avoid the due diligence of falsifying the thing that they found appealing.
That's because it's cheaper.
It's cheap, and they've not been taught the tools that are necessary to participate in what is a system of politics, which we have pushed the participation in pretense of responsibility for the commons down to people who are no longer demonstrating competence for research, for responsibility for the commons.
Yes.
So, I mean, if people have via negativa, or the court system, in self-defense against against others, whether it be individuals, organizations, industries, or the government,
right,
then they have defense. But there's no reason that a person who has defense needs offense. In other words, the ability to render an opinion on how things ought to be, unless you've demonstrated competence in that thing you claim to want to influence. So what's happened is we've opened the door to Pandora's box of idiots.
Yes.
So this is an easily fixed problem, but we have to be willing to do it. And the only way to do that is that I know of, without just doing a lot of harm to the irresponsible people, is to separate from the irresponsible people and rebuild responsibility.
Yeah. It's a revolutionary function though, Kurt. It's like the modification is no small thing. I don't regard it as particularly problematic with regard to causing people to understand the necessity for the change. And I don't think it's particularly difficult to cause them to understand how to change it, but it is a big change.
Yes.
I think where it's manageable. And I think it's inevitable because no other alternative solution that is based on reality has been or will be offered that I am aware of.
Well, the science says there is no other method.
Right?
Because this is the most parsimonious possible. Nothing else is possible. There's variations on it. So you can spin this however you want, but I mean, there's no, once you get down to the unification of the sciences and ultimate parsimony, there's really nowhere else to go. I mean, there's only so fine a granularity of human action that's possible.
That's
And
right.
once you talk about a sequence of steps of their human actions, you can't get more granular.
No, I think you're there, and I'm like, okay.
The problem is, how does, it's like, I always think about this, how does a people, I do this on Twitter just to watch people's reactions, but it's like they have no way of knowing people don't even have the competency. They don't have the understanding, and they don't have the competency. In other words, they don't have the general understanding, and they don't have the specific skills to be able to even understand these things. So I mean, it's like, what do you do?
Well, I understand what you're saying, and I would. The issue is how do we trust one another? See, the distinction between the left and the right in my mind is this. I was thinking about this adversarial processing of information versus agreement, right? And it's like agreement doesn't arrive at you cannot advance because you're all nodding heads in unison and you're not competing for the increase of precision of language and operations to rapidly improve the condition of the group. Whereas if we're adversarial and we have agreed upon a civil mechanism by which we settle our differences, a marketplace for the truth, now we rapidly advance because we will each look at objective information and determine what is actually occurring and what is the most correspondent reality between the choices offered. And the fact that the left is shutting down free speech is emblematic of it.
Of course. They don't want to market for truth. They want to market for agreement. And agreement means no evasion of responsibility, allowing the maximization of consumption. I mean, it's just herd. I mean, it's horrible, but it's just what herd animals do. I mean, if you think about it, how does the herd adapt? It adapts only when the wolves are coming. Well, we're the wolves.
They shed a few weak ones.
Right. We're the wolves called responsibility. And they're the sheep of irresponsibility. All they want to know is which way is the herd running so that I can be safe among the herd. Right. So they're not adaptive at all. They're just consuming. They're reactive. They're not adaptive. Now, they think they're adaptive, but all they're trying to do is get more free lunch. Right. So I mean, that's not adapting, right? That's certainly not evolving because they're not increasing the conservation of energy by improving themselves.
Well, no, because it goes to the theodicy thing again, which is God made me like this. I'm just fine, perfect. I don't need to improve.
Yeah, well, what is adulting and what is agency? What is executive function? And what does executive function regulate? Well, you're just talking about people who have less executive function in self-regulation of what? Okay. Of emotions.
Yes.
All right. And so that's okay because we don't want mothers to have self-regulation of emotions in response to their offspring. But we don't want males who can't self-regulate either. And we don't want females who can't self-regulate either, regardless of whether they're their children. But, some of us were born to self-regulate. And so we self-regulate across a different time frame. This is why I keep saying time is so important. Because they keep emotions are now.
Right.
We are over time and over how many people, right? The Kantian imperative. What if everybody did this? But it's true for me.
Okay.
Oh, that hurts. Every time I hear that, I would just
Right. Oh my. Oh my. Yes. Yes.
Can I go off on a
Certainly.
tangent topic now? Well, along the, you know how obsessed I am with logic. Like I just illustrated a bunch of reasons why I focus on logic, right? And while, you know, most of the guys can get there they get reciprocity and demonstrated interest. It's hard for them to get truth. They can sort of get group evolutionary and sex differences, right? They can begin to put behavioral economics, the economics of human behavior, two different things. Another one of those fucking term problems. The economics of human behavior into sort of expressions. And a few people can get into operational language. But, you know, getting to the point where you're really the nerd of this is when you get the logics, right? When you understand. And so this is to amplify. It may not seem like I'm trying to make these two things fit together, but I am. What we were talking.
That's a disclaimer, kids.
I am. I'm really trying. So when we talk about flipping thought around from the via positiva to the via negativa, we also say, but look how much more knowledge it takes to think in the via negativa, right? Instead of just imitating the path, you've got to know what the set of paths are so that you can falsify, right, which paths are possible and say, well, then this one might be possible, but that one's way more parsimonious and complete. Or you can say that, but I can't generate a constructive proof that that's possible from first principles, right? So how am I going to tie this in? So I was listening. Okay. So the whole idea here, this falsification, culminates in this process of what is logic? You know, what is logic? What is the discipline of logic? And what does it mean when I say the logics, right? Or the grammars, right? The different logics, the different systems of using logic, right? Right. Does this make sense? Yeah,
I'm good. Hanging.
All right. So when I'm looking at my whole thing since you started me on this, starting from the bottom up last summer, was to talk about, to use physics, because it's physics and math are both fucked. Or, excuse me, they're both broken. So I was thinking about this. I'm listening to Tim. What the hell is his name? Tim Maudlin. Tim Maudlin is a philosopher who's mostly right about what's wrong with physics, and he understands the basic issue here. He doesn't know how to fix it, but he's sort of getting there. I mean, he can explain it in terms that make that if you don't have to understand math to do it, and he's one of the few guys who can do that, right? Because he's really a philosopher and a physicist, right? Which is philosophy of physics. So I was trying to explain, how would I make the same argument about the via negativa to someone like him or anyone, right? How would I try to explain how big a deal this is? Because what I think about myself is when somebody asks me about all these fields, well, how do you know that much about quantum mechanics or about, any discipline all the way across the spectrum?
Right.
It's because people don't understand what we're specializing in by specializing the via negativa. We're specializing in the way by which humans engage in ignorance, error, bias, and deceit. So when I look at math or physics, I don't really have to know so much about what they're doing as how people lie that way.
It's like I can smell it, right? Good enough.
Right. And so whenever I look at a field, I just have this catalog of logics, right? I mean, all right, and the via negativa and the first principles. And so I'm going through here and I understand the first principles of the logics at the neurological level, right? I mean, it's just simple stuff to me. So I'm just looking for, well, how do people lie this way? And right, I don't mean lie like they're trying to deceive you, but they come up with stories, right? That try to claim a pretense of knowledge that they can't demonstrate.
Right.
And they can't demonstrate it by creating an analogy to experience, which is, of course, what's wrong with physics. It's not being expressed as an analogy to experience, so you can't, of course, claim coherence. Now,
say that again. Say that again, please.
You can't claim coherence with the rest of human experience until you've created it. You've created a narrative that's an analogy to experience. And there's no evidence that there is any system in the universe at all yet that can't be reduced to analogy to experience.
Right.
So of course, I'm trying to say, well, okay, well, what are the ways that the rest of the universe demonstrates patterns? And then what's wrong with quantum mechanics, the quantum theory in general, and how they're talking about it? Well, I just have to look at what's wrong with math. And I have to look at what's wrong with how people talk about language. And I have to look at how people lie, right? Or category pretense of knowledge. So I just look at the problem that they're describing and say, how could this be used to construct a deceit? And then for what's remaining, if it was consistent with the rest of analogy to experience. So it sounds like you have to know everything about every field. It's actually the opposite. You have to know the logics, right? The grammars and how people lie. And then you can understand every field. Because you're not really
that's messed up.
Does that make sense?
Because you just eliminate all the errors.
You're just looking for errors, right? You're just saying this can't be true. This can't be true. If you can't make an operational construction of it, it can't be true. So, what's wrong? Well, go ahead.
No, it's like you call it lies, and it's like, I think that generates a big pushback because it's really error.
Well, again, I mean, are we talking about crime or tort?
I understand you. I know.
I do it because I want to bait that conversation. I expressly want to bait that conversation with every opportunity. I'm not lying. Well, have you done due diligence against it? It's a tort. I mean, if you're not, then you're spreading that information. You haven't done due diligence. It may not be a crime. It's a tort. Because you're actually causing harm. You don't know that you're causing harm, but that doesn't mean that only means you didn't do due diligence against causing harm.
So it's interesting. I had this case, which I would like to share this little story. I had a nurse come from far away, like 100 miles, to come visit me in my office, and she was trying to sell me a drug. And I asked her, I said, what is the number needed to treat, which is a secret magic number in medicine, which is like, how many do you have to treat to prevent one bad thing? And she says, we don't have that number yet. I said, you drove 100 miles to tell me you have an experimental drug you want me to give to my patients? And so I threw her out of the office eventually. Anyway, so I asked a cardiologist about it. And here's what he said, because he was prescribing this medicine. And I said, this isn't even proven to be working. And he goes, here's what he said. Don't you believe in the class effect? No, like, I don't operate a faith-based business here, sir. Which is, you just see how they lie, and you smell it. It's like that. There's nothing there. It's an empty space. You're looking for a fact to put your hand on.
Right. I mean, the problem is that he's justified a pragmatism. He hasn't done due diligence to, right? It's like if I'm a patient and you tell me there's a field of choices here.
That's right.
These things, we have no fucking evidence of this, but since that's available, right? These things are here. These things we've proven don't work on you, right? There's these things available. We have no fucking evidence of them. But if you're willing to try them, You can try them. I just can't warranty anything, but I don't feel comfortable depriving you of
Right.
an opportunity.
Right.
Right? That's different. And the patient can say, well, shit, I'm going to fucking, I mean, because I've been there, I'm going to die anyway if I don't do this, so I'm going to try. Right? So,
Right.
you know, you're like, okay, well, I'll try, right? And maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Who the fuck knows? I mean, it might be that some combination of the 6 things you,
That's right.
right? Or it could be that the opposite, the one we're seeing, of course, now with the vaccine, which is causing a fucking nightmare everywhere. You know, they tell us things, and I'm like, you can't make the promises you're making without the evidence to, you know, in other words, it takes a long time to know if you change something that's subtle.
That's right.
Right? You are not going to know what the consequences are for forever, especially if it's immune related, because that shit, I mean, you don't want to talk about complicated. I mean, there's stuff in your body that's pretty obvious, like how many salts are moving across this fucking neural channel, right? I mean, there's that's okay. But when you're talking immune system, that shit is like, it's like fucking Yahtzee dice combining and recombining and, you know, and over permutations and signals and whatever. And it's like, we don't fucking know. We can only try and error, right?
Oh, yeah. There you have it. So it's via negativa, understand the logics.
And so that's why I'm so fascinated. So, you know, it's like there's this ladder you got to climb in this discipline, right? But the end point of that ladder is just that you have a sort of measuring stick for bullshit. Really? I mean, that's it, right? But in every field. And it becomes right in every field, because the way, well, you know, it's like, does that make sense? Because
it goes to this universally commensurable language for all human potential experience.
Essentially, you know how it's possible to tell the truth, right? And you know how, in other words, truth is a thing we know how to state right now, right? If you can't construct it in a sequence of operations, in other words, a sequence, if you can't construct it using the system of language we've defined here, an operational language, and creating an analogy that produces a subjectively testable analogy to experience across those dimensions, which I've mentioned, which are identity, logical consistency, external correspondence, operational possibility, rational choice, reciprocity, completeness, parsimony, and full accounting. Unless you can do that, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. So, and there
I have to do this just because that series was wonderful.
I mean, if you can't do that, I mean, that's what we teach, right? But I mean, I just said it. It's not like, it doesn't require a textbook, right? It's a list of checkboxes.
I know
okay.
know it.
Okay, well,
actually, wait, I have to beg to differ. It does.
Yeah, it does require textbook. Okay, what I mean is, you can memorize that checklist, right?
That's right.
Right.
No, that's why I went the cup around when I want to make a quote, because I'm like, oh, I better write that one down. That was a good one.
So I mean, once you know that, then you know how people engage in ignorance, error, bias, and deceit. That's your charitable sequence versus my just lying.
Right. Your shorthand for that sequence.
So when you get to that, you say, okay, well, here's how people do that. And then you say, here are the first principles. And the first principles are all reducible to analogy experience, and they're all based on a very simple idea, triangle.
Right.
If you can't fucking, it's like weights on a scale. You know, like you want to know how much something weighs, and it's before you have the thing in the middle, right? You just have to say, well, this is a gram, and this is 5 grams, this is 10, and you're just playing this game of which combination gets me this thing. Well, that's what we're doing, the first principles, right? I'm just trying to first principles. And then, you know, he's like, okay, well, and now here's the ways they're lying.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's really, it's just, that's why I'm so obsessed with the logics. And so, have I made that point there so I can continue on?
Yeah.
So I was thinking, so I'm listening to Tim Maudlin, and he's just doing a really great job of not mathing right? He's given, this is the secret. If you can't explain the math and operational terms and you have to resort to symbols, you don't understand it. Right? But I'm listening to him and I'm saying, well, he's trying to make he's making this point about that he talks about macro scale relativity. He talks about quantum scale, which is quantum mechanics, and he talks about the physics of probability. And I'm like, I think that's the problem. He's right that there's those three categories. But what bothers me is the failure to grasp that all mathematics is probabilistic.
Right.
It's just that the variance in anything we measure, so if you're talking about apples and oranges, I mean, it's a fucking apple. I mean, it's right. I mean, it's either an apple or it isn't.
Right.
If you're talking about the points on a triangle, well, that triangle could be a lot of triangles, right? Infinite.
That's right.
Right. If you're talking about a geometric shape, and it's rotating in space, well, all those things, they're statistical representations because it's not the thing. Right? It's like the argument we have about lines. Einstein said there are no, basically just showed there are no lines.
Right.
They're only curves, right? Well, okay, so when we talk about lines, you're talking about an abstract, a statistical thing, because they can't actually exist outside of your ability to draw one. Right.
That's right.
All right.
That's
So
right. I call it a scale dependent illusion.
right. I mean, it's a probabilistic function. So that's what we mean by language. This is a cup. That's a probabilistic statement. There's a lot of things that fit the description of a cup.
That's right.
But I mean this one.
Right.
Right. But the probability of this, if I put, like, you've got, is yours one of these two? Is your Starbucks too?
We're on the same cup.
Yeah. So the probability that my cup and your cup are the same cup is
none.
none. Right.
Although our cups are the same. How about that?
Well, I mean, so this is the issue that's always bothered me when they're talking about this, and he's really good. It's like, well, you're just talking about when talking about superposition, whatever. You're just talking about measurements of vectors.
Right.
That's all you're talking. Some vectors cancel each other, whatever, and you're going to get a probability. And they're all probable. It's like there's nothing magical here. We just don't know state A, right? So we can't know state B. We can only know that there's a description of all the states along here that are superposition, which are something, and then it's going to be somewhere in that probabilistic space. Well, if I take this fucking coffee cup and I rotate it that way, that's all that happened.
Right. That's right. Because it could be in a wide variety of arrangements, right? And now you have collapsed this potential functions.
And
right?
There's this might be one of those things that's way too hard for people to follow. But I'm trying, okay? I'm really trying, right? So my point is,
that's what this symbol is. I'm really trying.
I'm going to try. I'm putting in my. I put my lip. You ever seen little kids when they go to baseball?
Yeah.
Little 6-year-old kid. I want to play baseball. Yeah, like the He-Man. Look, well, I'm going to He-Man try to explain this. I don't know if I'll succeed. It's like everything else. I'll fail like 10 times and I'll get it the 11th or 12th or 20th or some 100th. Right?
We don't know. It's a probabilistic statement. We don't know.
So it's kind of, I always think it's funny. Everything is probabilistic. It's just the variance, the potential, the probability, the potential of variance. And even when you say probabilistic, that's only if things are deterministic. After the things are probabilistic, they're only likely.
That's right.
Right.
Right. This is interesting because it kind of goes to this in time versus overtime function.
Yes.
Because it is the fact that it's not deterministic, it's probabilistic, it's in time or overtime. It's deterministic in time.
Yes.
Probabilistic overtime.
And it's only likely over a long period of time. Right? So deterministic, probabilistic, likely. That's actually a really good spectrum. Let's use that.
That's good.
Boy, that's like the second really good thing you did today.
I'll tell
Man,
you
you're
what,
just,
I'm
you're
just
just,
here,
you're printing out the ideas, man.
probabilistic,
Lego.
deterministic, probabilistic, likely.
Right.
Is that the right order?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what that series is for, but I get it. It's potential,
It's
right?
prediction.
Predictive function, yeah. Okay.
Of course, there's the negative, right? There's non-deterministic, non-probabilistic, improbable, not improbable and unlikely, right? So it goes both directions.
There you go.
So I want to make sure I didn't forget where I was going with that.
That's right.
So it was, oh shit, I did.
Well, we were going from analogy to experience with the scale-dependent illusion. You were talking about mathematics and
Physics, what's wrong with physics? I talked about the mathiness. And
you
then
were
oh, okay, got it.
quantum.
Okay, so I said there's two things I'm trying to relate to each other. And this is what I mean, how people engage in ignorance, error, bias, and deceit
Right.
is generally a failure of full accounting.
Yes.
In other words, you didn't look where I'm saying you didn't falsify it by looking at the field of possible things so that could satisfy it or could not. So like when I listen to this guy talk and he's doing a great job, I'm like, he's so close. And the answer is that that's going to be, and I'm listening to him, I'm like, God, he's so good. I mean, I want to hug this guy. He's so good at his job. He's so much better than everybody else I've sort of found, which is unfortunate because he's the least well known of the people who talk about physics, and he's probably other than Gerhard Hooft, he probably is one of the ones you should listen to, right? And then you get what's his name, David. I always talk about him and I get him wrong. Anyway, Israeli guy teaching it. I think he's at Oxford. Just not coming to me. Anyway, he's like part right too. But it's kind of funny is that David's talking in stories, right? Which is what I'd expect from their culture. I'd expect stories. But from our culture, you get Tim. What's his name?
I don't recall.
I want to say Matheson, and that's wrong. Maudlin.
Yeah.
And you get him, and he's speaking in facts. It's just kind of funny to see these two guys talking that way.
Variation, right? Of
variation
grammars.
But they're using cultural grammars, and it's fascinating to compare the storytelling versus the measurement telling, right? The measurement telling, just very interesting to see that. So I listened to him and I'm like, well, the fundamental problem is the one that people don't know the tools we're trying to give them yet, which is, okay, there's only so many ways people lie or engage in ignorance, error, bias, and deceit.
Yes.
And it's one of those ways is that they don't do a full accounting of what's possible and impossible for everything that they've claimed. So I'm sitting here and saying, well, the problem with most people that gets them screwed up with the quant is the one I talked about with steam, right? The other day, is that the quantum background is closed. There's nowhere for anything to go.
Right.
So of course it doesn't behave like anything else in our world where like I roll a ball and it eventually stops and whatever. It's right in the universe, it can't do that. Right? Something's got to stop the ball, right? And somebody's got to be able to make it, right? There's nowhere for anything to go. So
right.
You have to have a negative ball to it. So the problem is this assumption we have. It's like the assumption of lines. This is the point I'm trying to get to. So in QM, I see three basic problems. They haven't produced a narrative that's an analogy to experience, so we can't subjectively test it. Instead, it's not a theory. It's a theory of facts and measurements, not a theory of operations. which is what a theory needs to be.
All right.
Second is that they're engaging in mathematics, calling it probability without understanding all mathematics is probabilistic. And so there's actually no difference. It's just the number of the variance of the thing we're measuring, and the number of in other words, the number of interactions exceeds human ability to count. Right? So there's nothing magical there. And the third thing, and the last, third or fourth thing, I can't remember how to enumerate it so far, is that the universe is not like the rest of the world we experience. Because
it is totally not. It's totally like that. It's outside the scope. It's outside of human experience because it's so freaking big. Right. And it's so small too.
Well, that's the weird thing is that in our experience, if I boil the water, the steam goes away. But in the universe, it has nowhere to go.
Can't go away.
It can't go away. It has nowhere to go. So and then the last thing, which is, well, there's an interesting thing, which is the rate at which photons, right? But rate at which whirlpools, right, pass through the quantum background.
Right. Right. Eddies, right. Eddies.
Right. And there's the problem is there's the rate at which polarization happens, and the rate at which the electromagnetic effect of polarization occurs.
Right.
Now, so we don't know what those measures are. So, but it's not incomprehensible to just do what I said.
Find those things.
Just find those fucking things, right? I mean, it's not that we don't know about dipoles.
So operationalize it instead of just play math games.
Right, and I'm like, just create a narrative, which is what I'm saying. Create a series of stories that could be, and then falsify the narratives, because each time you do that, you're producing new information within a context, and facts are only useful, even facts of measurements are only useful inside of a theory that explains their causal relations. So I mean, I'm just like, these industries, you know what I mean? It's like, if you understand how people make mistakes, you can look at any problem and say, what kind of mistakes are we making here? Not what could this be? The justificationism versus the falsification.
Right. Don't tell me stories about the elephant that may be in the room because it's a quantum elephant that might appear
just
any
like
moment.
given this observation, how do people normally make assumptions, filling in knowledge they can't operationalize, and then try to fill those in and create a bunch of stories, in other words, permutations, and then just falsify. So the problem is what's happened, reason I curse Einstein all the time, right, is that he and Bohr created this idea that math is a thing rather than physics. In other words, math is a language, right? And I'm also increasingly convinced that mathematical symbolism is a real problem versus algorithmic expression. Like, there's nothing you can't write in mathematics that can't be written programmatically. Yes. They usually say it in ordinary English, but I prefer it be written algorithmically. And I'm like, wait a minute, there's way more
inflated form of math, kind of like it's inflated language in math.
Or math is deflated because it's removed from causality, whereas algorithmic processing is causal, it's sequential.
Right.
And so I'm just like, well, math is a balance scale, whereas operations are actions, right? They're actual changes of state, not measurements of a state. So this problem is, I'm not trying to pick on physics and mathematics. It's just that we treat them as so pure, but they are, because they're so fucking simple compared to economics and behavior, and right, they're just trivially simple, right? Which is the reason we want to solve them. In other words, that's why math is the gold standard, is the dumbest language we have, right? So if you understand math and state, like the math or states or algorithms or simulations, or you understand the series of potentials, you understand they're all just languages, that the scope of knowledge stated each one of those is explicit, that mathematics is really good for explaining constant relations, but it's impossible at speaking operational relations, right? I mean, that's what Wolfram's argument is. So if you understand these basic ideas about logic and language, right, including logic and language as expressions of the means by which humans err, right? Right. Then you have this amazing tool set to look at problems in any discipline, not just the
That's right.
sciences.
That's
And
right.
just, and you're not looking for what could that be? You're looking for what mistakes do we generally make in these category of problems?
That's right.
So the via negativa is literally turning the human brain inside out and saying, don't look at it from the via positiva, what hypothesizing, which is what your auto association is. Take the system of measurement, which is how we make mistakes, because that's knowable.
That's
And
right.
then just look at where mistakes can be, and that'll tell you where to look.
Are you ready for me to tie this back to Aquinas?
Wait a minute, did I get it? Did I make the point? Because I
think
was really worried. I didn't think I
I
could
think
get that
you
across.
made it. I don't want to stop you if you think you need to make the point better.
No, go ahead. I just want to make sure I made
Because
it.
like this, so I saw you change your terminology to from lie to err, and now I'm like this. I'm going to tie it back to Saint Thomas Aquinas because it goes to and what's his name? Our friend from Toronto, Peterson. He talks about sin is to miss the mark, and it goes to sin, which is how do we miss the mark is what your studies are about, which is a form of sin. It's error by whatever cause you fail to meet correspondence. And how did it happen is what we study. There's like only but 10 ways to miss the target, right?
Right.
And it's like, well, that's what you study. The errors by which we miss the target by unintentional means or by intentional means. That's all that this is. And so it's the study of sin.
Well, I'm so reluctant to go there, but I can't argue with it.
No, it's
I prefer my legal phrasing as failure of due diligence creating a tort.
I know, but
what the hell? What's sin? That's what sin is.
I know. I'm tying it back to Aquinas, and it's falsifiable and defies falsification.
You know, one of the things that's interesting is why don't, because all this magic happens in England, right? Where's
Okay.
Aquinas living when he's writing? Where is he writing?
I don't know. He was all over the place too.
Italy.
Okay.
Kingdom of Sicily.
Huh. That's unpredicted.
I don't know why I didn't know that. It's kind of odd. I would think I would have known that.
But now you do.
Where did he write though? I want to know where he wrote. I think he was in Paris. I want to say he was in Paris. Yes. Paris. He wrote in Paris. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. That makes sense. I'm like, that doesn't make sense to me. I know what's happening and where, and that's like, that doesn't. This is what I get for saying I only study science. I don't study philosophy or theology because anyway, I didn't get a reaction out of you.
I didn't have much to say. I'm like this. I'm still absorbing this. Where was Thomas?
So you get Aquinas. You remember the church. The church creates the first academies, right?
Yes.
But you really get the real, because French are French. The only good ones you get are Oxford and Cambridge. Did I rub that in again?
That was pretty.
I just love shitting on the French. I
That
really
was
do.
salty, man.
Every opportunity to shit on the French. So anyway, so we don't really study him and Bacon in the same breath. And I think that's really where we need to start. Yeah, I think that would be a really good because if you start with him and Bacon and you get up to, then you get up into, in other words, I don't like the isolation of Aquinas
Yes.
as a theologian. Instead of the man who's, just as the Greeks were trying to move religion to philosophy, he was trying to move theology into science. Right. I mean, it's just a very interesting sort of, and I think it'd be like, I read Bacon and I'm like, yeah, that's where it comes from. But you don't, well, what the thing is, you see in Blackstone, you see Aquinas, right? He's writing, he's just saying it's God's law, but I don't know.
This is why I have to tie it back. I have to tie it back and make sure that, see, there's an arrow coming from 1200 AD. And here it is, it presents itself momentarily in the present.
Yep.
As,
and it's so brilliant, really. That's the thing is, he really did it, right? He sent this, whereas, I always felt like Augustine went the wrong direction because Plato was fucked up. Excuse me. Plato was wrong. But you get to Aquinas and he's like, okay, we got enough stuff coming out of this. We got this. We got this. I think we got this. And then you end up with, so you see Bacon and Aquinas, then you see Locke and Smith and Hume. I'm including Blackstone in there now. I probably should include I've been increasingly think I should include Rutherford in there. Right? And you get there and it's like, God damn it, it's coming together. Because in the Aryan world, the gods are specious. They're almost like competitors, right? They're not particularly good people. They're like a big dysfunctional family that man is frequently the victim of.
I regard them as it's impulses. I regard them as essentially impulses that are to be suppressed because they're going to go astray.
And we have it wrong too, because it's the correct answer. What you're saying is their personalities. They're right. That's what
potential.
Their personalities, and so it's really hard to say they represent this or that. Well, it's more that their personality has an affinity for that kind of thing, right? But the gods are personalities, right? That's what they represent. And so they're these, and most of them are not very nice people. Or as
lacking ethics, I should say.
I don't know about yeah. Well, so that's the truth. The problem is we read the Victorianized version of the Greek gods, but they're sons of bitches, really.
They do whatever they want.
They're really awful people in the ancient versions. And so, what they're supposed to evoke power. So what am I trying to get at? So what I think he did is he, you have this beautiful synthesis of the laws of nature and God as the laws of nature. It's really coming out together. And this is more in my view, what Epicurus and Aristotle were trying to accomplish. And then so we go through the Middle Ages and we get Plato. And I see what happens with Augustine is that the 1,000 years, the 500 years, 600 years, whatever, is you've sort of got the restoration of Aristotelian and thought coming, which surely we should put Epicurus first, but Aristotle's get all the credit. So put Aristotle and Epicurus first. And that comes into Aquinas and it sort of washes a lot of the Plato out. It leaves the institution of the church, which Plato was trying to create and Augustine was trying to create. But it created it as it left the institution intact, but it created a God that was more basically nature, right? And so whenever we're investigating the world, we're investigating nature of God, not scripture. And so I just liked that I think he made that beautiful.
Yeah, it's like washing out of the artificial human construction, social construction,
Right.
out of the conceptualization of the divine to
Right. And by the time you get
nature's God yielding science.
by the time you get to Smith and Hume and Locke and Blackstone and Rutherford, you've really got to the point where they've just synthesized them, and we just don't recognize it as a religion. Right. We just don't.
It's just too distilled. It's like
yeah.
Operational. It's operational.
Yeah, but so that's what we got wrong. We didn't leave it as a religion. We didn't finish that. That's why, again, the Industrial Revolution fucks it all up, because basically it's early. We needed a couple hundred years. We needed a little more time in the oven.
It's an accident, man. It's just an accident. And it's like this, someone rang the bell, and it's like stunning to human consciousness, that revolutionary occurrence.
Yep.
And here we are in the aftermath of having our bell rung, right? And now we're like, oh, okay. And now we reflect back on the error that was made over the last 150 years. That's what your job is. You've reflected on the error, and then you reincorporate the science and now reflect it back to the law. That's what, here we are, finishing your book. We have to talk about lying sometime. We're almost
I mean, it's okay but to think about my mind is processing court stuff even while we're talking. So I can't, the minute I switch over to lying, I have to actually think.
No, I'm not trying to make you think. I'm just trying to, I'm causing you to reflect on, we need to get making your book.
Yes. Well, I mean, assuming I don't have any more problems.
God damn it. Hang on. Knock on wood, right? You're doing good, Kurt. I enjoyed chatting with you today, man.
We had fun. We did good stuff today. We did a bunch of topics.
I'm going to send this etymology of sin. I have a page. I will mark it in the notes somewhere. I think that this is what it is. It's just sin. How do they sin? And not whether or not they know they're sinning is another matter. It doesn't matter. And it's interesting because Aquinas talked about this. He talked about accidents. And it's like accidentally we are possessed by accidents. We are essentially possessed if we are unaware of the accident and act upon its errors. And that's what we're talking about in our general conversation, the most general way.
Well, again, we'll go back to the question. You have the factions, the theological, the philosophical,
yes,
the scientific, and the ideological.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, I was like, anytime I bring up the theological or any analogy to it,
yes.
I get shit from both sides. So
really, that must mean you're over the target, brother.
No, it just means that.
No,
it just means that people.
It means you're communicating with them in a manner that they understand, even if they disagree. But you're causing, it's the same as calling it a lie for the purpose of stirring up the pot, right? It causes a response, which is engagement, which is desired.
Sure. Sin is irresponsibility. Failure due diligence.
It's a failure. Yes, it's just a failure. And it's why did you sin? Well, you were possessed by something, and we can discuss it in first principles, I'm certain. What caused you to err?
All right, brother.
All right. Well,
we did 2 hours. That's not bad.
Well, how about that? It was more than I expected, and I appreciate the time. And I will look forward to chatting with you tomorrow. I think I'll be in touch in the morning.
Love you, brother. Thank you.
Have a great day.